Finding Freedmen Stories of Indian Territory. This particular video will focus on some of the untold stories that come out of the rich family history of those once enslaved in the land that became the state of Oklahoma. The goal is to place their story back on Oklahoma's landscape. These stories are found simply in the records. One such story emerged from a small note found in a box of letters while going through a set of records at the National Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland. There was a small handwritten letter that consisted only of three sentences written by a man whose name was Ellis Williams. The letter was written in 1903, and one might assume that it was just a simple query from a man whose story really appeared to be an unanswered story. The writer simply wanted to know if it was true what he had come to learn at that point in time in 1903. He was asking in that small note if it was true that he and his people in Chickasaw country had been denied their rights. In spite of the misspellings found in the letter, his intent is clear. He just wanted to know the facts. As he said simply, I wish to know if it is a fact that the Indians beat us out of our freedmen rights or not. He wrote this letter from his home in Berwyn, Indian Territory. A little bit of background to help you understand what probably prompted this letter. He was a Chickasaw Freedman, and he lived in a community among others who were basically abandoned. They had been released from bondage in 1866, a full year after the Civil War had ended, and this release was reluctant by the Chickasaw slaveholders. They were never adopted or made citizens in the very nation into which they had been born, had toiled for decades. So for over 40 years, from 1866 into the 20th century until 1907 with statehood, they lived in the land of their birth, where their parents and grandparents had been enslaved. Yet until that time, they had no country. Their former slaveholders, although they agreed to do so in the treaty that they signed, the freedmen, the freed people in Chickasaw country, had no rights. Today, the nation is a wealthy tribe, one of the wealthiest, in fact. And even today, the descendants of those enslaved people have no rights. And now that more than a century has passed since statehood, a few stories do come to the surface, but some appear only on faded pages in forgotten boxes at the National Archives. But it is from those letters that we can find a story, such as the case of Ellis Williams. No matter how painfully sad his letter might be, or maybe that he was a man who did not have an extensive formal education, he knew what he was asking. He would live into statehood and see the first letter, the first law of the land that would be passed in the new state, the coach law that would put even more restrictions on him being a man of African descent. He knew something was coming and was prompted to ask the question, so we're not going to be treated the same. It's not clear whether he got an immediate response to his letter of 1903. He was given the status as a freedman, which that status would force him to be ostracized for having an undeserved stain placed upon their heads. That stain of slavery, a status that neither he nor his parents or grandparents ever volunteered to have. That practice still holds to this day, with the stain of slavery, as freedmen descendants have no place in Chickasaw space to this day. But who was Ellis Williams the man? Could anything else be learned about him? Clearly, he had to have been a man with a life of some sort, perhaps with a family, and most certainly with a history. Who was Ellis Williams the man? Looking at his Dawes file, we see that he did live in Berwyn Indian Territory. And he did appear in front of the Dawes Commission to apply for himself, his wife, his children at that time. And of course, we see that he had a fairly large family. There are 11 people. He and his wife had so many children, a very large family. We also see that he had been enslaved by Sophia Keel. His wife Viney had been enslaved by Betsy Eastman. And we see that he made his initial application in September of 1898. We also know that he had suffered some heartbreak between 1901 and 1902. He had lost 3 children in that time period. We know that the parents of Ellis Williams were Reuben Williams, who was owned by Lottie Schultz, and his mother, Julia, who was enslaved by Dickerson Willis. His wife, Viney, her father was Sampson Eastman. Her mother was Aggie Sampson. But if you take a look a little bit closer, you also see that Viney's father was also her slaveholders. It was the same person. Sampson Eastman's name was there as her father, and the father's owner was the same man. In other words, he owned his own son. When we look at the application jacket of Ellis Williams, we see that he, like many other Chickasaw freedmen, had had his original interview, his original application was missing. And it was replaced by one of these summaries. These summaries, kept in the file officially by the members of the Dawes Commission, consisted of basic statements, but the questions and the answers and the back and forth long discarded, especially in the files of Chickasaw Freedmen. So we see a simple statement. I'm 43 years old, says Ellis. I belong to Sophia Keel. My wife, Viney, 42, belonged to Betsy Eastman. Now we know that's not the real interview that transpired, but that's what is there. Our children are, and you see the names of the children. Emma, who's married to Charlie. Mackenzie, 19, Joe, 17, Reuben, 15, and on and on. And simply the last word typed, enrolled. We know that's not the interview, but that's all that's there in terms of the words of Ellis Williams. However, one extra letter is found in that application jacket, and it's quite enlightening. It was also written in 1903, T.J. Carson, who's a notary public, took the notes. He took the notes made by Zach Kemp, who, being duly sworn, testifies that he knew personally in the state of Mississippi the following Chickasaw Indians, and he names them Elsifola, Tuthalo, and Sukata, and that Tuthalo was the grandfather of Ellis Williams, and that Elsifola was the sister of Tuthalo, and that Eliza Newberry was the grandmother of Ellis Williams, and that Rachel Colbert is the daughter of Elsifola, and that Firma Fisher was the brother of Elsifola. In other words, there's some family data found in this letter. This is rare to find a more extensive family history, especially with Chickasaw Freedmen. So what this letter reveals is that a relationship existed between Ellis Williams, his family, and the Chickasaws who were named in the letter. And the relationship was one of kinship. An acquaintance was begun between Zach Kemp, who knew them long before removal, as it was said, back in Mississippi. Ellis Williams was recognized as being part of this group of related persons. And of course, one can truly now understand his concern over his status as freedman. And what makes this letter unique is that it provided more generational data, far more than is usually found in freedmen files, especially from this nation. It's describing relationships that existed among a group of people in spite of the institution of slavery surrounding them. Ellis proved a true blood tie to Chickasaws, yet he was assigned freedman status. Basically, he simply said, I wish to know if it is a fact that the Indians beat us out of our freedmen rights or not. As we look at a letter written 2 years later, written to him in Berwyn, as you look at the underlying parts, it appears from the records of this office that both your father and mother were slaves, and your enrollment as a Chickasaw freedman having been approved by the department, this office is without authority to take further steps in the matter. Signed by the acting commissioner, except this is the commission to the 5 civilized tribes. This is the commission that assigned him freedman status and gave by blood status to others. This is the same commission, the very office that does have the authority to take further steps in the matter. The fact that was emphasized simply that your father and mother were slaves and you yourself were the slave of Sophia Keel. And it's not apparent that you have any right to enrollment as a citizen by blood of the Chickasaw Nation. Stern words written to a man who clearly had grandparents back in Mississippi who were citizens of the nation. But there's more on Ellis Williams. It can be assumed maybe that this is all there is to find, except his small letter and another letter found in the file. Nothing else about his life or his family or his associations. But there is more to find. He lived in a community of other people who had just as similar a background. They too had been enslaved in Indian territory by Chickasaws, and they were among a very large community of mixed bloods, of mixed African Chickasaw people. Ellis, apparently not long after those letters were received, he became the head petitioner in a case involving other freedmen with Chickasaw kin. From Fort Worth, Texas, at the Federal Record Center, there's a collection of records called the Perry Files, referring to Joe and Dillard Perry, who themselves were plaintiffs in another case. But among the Perry Files, file number 187, comes the case of Ellis Williams. And one can see in 1906, there appeared a petition praying for the transfer of the names of Ellis Williams, other members of his family as stated on the document, transferring their names to the roll of citizens by blood of the Chickasaw Nation. They made a formal challenge to the commissioner. And one can see it named not only Ellis, but members of his family. And there are other names that also appeared in the same file. His genealogy unfolded, and it unfolded quite extensively. It's alleged in the petition that Ellis, who was the principal petitioner, was the son of Julia and Reuben Williams. This was confirmed on the Dawes card. And that his father, Reuben Williams, was a mixed breed man and left the territory shortly before the Civil War. And that Julia Williams was a daughter of Liza Newberry, a recognized Chickasaw citizen, and that she was enrolled by Chickasaws on the first census roll made in the Chickasaw Nation. And that Ellis Williams was named, his name was also placed upon the least district roll. And the father of Julia and also the grandfather of the principal petitioner was Sakatabi Newberry, a full-blood recognized Chickasaw Indian. And of course, the petition unfolded with other relationships, very well documented in terms of who and how Ellis Williams was connected to others. His case was consolidated with other cases, and apparently his was just one of many. Many cases were mixed blood Chickasaw, African Chickasaw people who had well-documented mixed parentage. They sought to be placed on the roll with their blood kin, but here's the reason why. Freedmen were given allotted lands, 40 acres each person. One might assume, well, that's not bad, except those 40 acres represented 1/8 of what one received if they were placed on the blood roll. Those on the blood roll, including intermarried whites with no blood ties, received 320 acres of land each. There are dozens of pages in this file that go on and to show the kinship that Ellis Williams had. But in addition to that, those pages also show the kinship that so many other families also had. There are dozens of pages like this. And as you look closely at the images, you start to see name after name after name on page after page. And one realizes there's another story that's yet to be told. The outcome of Ellis Williams and his case, he was the head petitioner in a consolidated case that involved hundreds of people. In 1907, it was written to him, "You're hereby advised that on March the 2nd, 1907, Secretary of the Interior affirmed the order of this office of July 26, 1906, denying the petition submitted by you for the transfer of the names of Ellis Williams et al. From the role of Chickasaw Freedmen to the role of citizens by blood of this Chickasaw nation. But there's a larger story. He was one of dozens of mixed blood freedmen wishing to be recognized for their relationship to their kinsmen. His is one of 254 files in the Joe and Dillard Perry files. That collection, and that collection, if one just counts the pages, it's over 7,000 pages of stories of these families. And they are part of 2,000 plus individuals in the Ligon case. The Ligon case, the story of Betty Ligon. These were individuals who were also addressing their legacy and who they were in the Chickasaw Nation. The head litigant was Betty Ligon, and the case, now known as Equity Case 7071. At the University of Oklahoma, one can find a transcript of the record in the appeals court in Indian Territory. And that is even more startling to see how many people were very much like Ellis Williams. As one begins to open the file, one sees page after page after page after page. And even when one thinks one was complete, one finds even more pages reflecting individuals who are speaking to their history and making an effort to claim their legacy. Summarizing all of this, there are multiple lessons, but one of the biggest lessons is to take note of everything. The smallest document, even a small 3-sentence handwritten letter. The actions of a simple man writing a letter can open the door to an incredible history. Ellis Williams did live beyond his denial to be recognized for who he was. He remained in Indian Territory, lived until statehood. His name is first found in the 1910 federal census. It's not known when he died, but he lived his life on his land allotment. And it appears that his name doesn't appear in later census years. But he raised his family there. They are rooted there clearly. He lived to see grandchildren as well. He died sometimes after 1910, but his story mirrors that of so many others who have a history rooted in their native Chickasaw community before removal from Mississippi, with his parents being taken to the territory, being enslaved, living to see freedom. Yet their history would eventually be erased from the annals of Oklahoma history. There's still so much more to find, and the story is one to be told. Hopefully, it will emerge as one that will be considered important to tell. These stories fit well in this Oklahoma space. Ellis Williams' story and that of others also fit in this Chickasaw space. His life and his legacy are among the many untold stories that matter. If you wish to learn more about freedmen, you are invited, of course, to obtain copies of Freedmen of the Frontier Volumes 1 and 2, now available on Amazon. You're also encouraged to connect with a community of others who are researching freedmen of Indian Territory. You're invited to join the Oklahoma Freedmen Collective. More information can be found at okfreedmen.org. Thank you for your time.